Microsoft 365 Business Premium includes a powerful set of tools to allow organizations to secure and manage their users, data, and devices. Included as part of Business Premium is Intune, a comprehensive mobile device management or MDM solution. Intune allows organizations to enroll and manage devices from multiple platforms, including Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android, and deploy device configurations and applications, ensuring security and compliance and minimizing the risk of security breaches and data loss. Microsoft partners can also utilize Microsoft 365 Lighthouse to make setting standards across multiple customers simple and intuitive. One of the first things we're going to go and do is set up some device enrollment restrictions. We only really want corporate-owned devices in Intune, and we are going to manage access to corporate data via personal devices a little bit differently in a bit. From here in the console, we're going to go to the Devices page, into Enrollment, hit through to Device Platform Restrictions. Across the top, you'll see some tabs for different operating systems that we can actually configure more granularly some controls if we want to, but the default priority device type restriction here, we're going to go and click on the All Users area, go into Properties, and edit on the platform settings. This shows us all of the platforms. So these are essentially the global or top level platform restrictions that are always going to apply. So we can be granular about these things, but we've got a column on the right for personally owned. We're going to go ahead and hit block across all of those. Hit save. And we've gone and blocked any personal devices from enrolling into Intune. While enrollment restrictions will stop personal devices actually enrolling into Intune, what it doesn't stop is personal devices accessing corporate data within the tenant. To secure that data, we're going to utilize app protection policies deployed within Intune. Microsoft already provides some great guidance in the form of the data protection framework, which gives us 3 levels: basic, enhanced, and high. Enhanced provides a good balance of security and user impact. Just to quickly go over some of the sections within an app protection policy, we've got the types of app that it protects. There's a couple of options, but I've gone for all apps, so everything that Intune provides capabilities for. The data protection section gives us options to prevent backups of that corporate data. There's some iOS specific settings in here. Access requirements are going to control the requirements when that user accesses the corporate account. It's going to require the use of a separate PIN to be created to then access the corporate apps. Although in iOS and Android, you can use biometrics or Touch ID to actually do that when you're accessing it from the phone. Conditional launch settings give us some additional capabilities to restrict or block access depending on certain conditions, like if devices are jailbroken or rooted. I used this advanced deployment guide for the creation and deployment of my app protection policies, and you can too. Next up, we're going to go in here, go to the Apps menu and Filters. As you can see, I've already created my Android filter, and I'm going to create one for iOS policy. I'm going to create a Manage App filter, which is usable within the app protection policies. I'm going to give it a similar name. Choose our target platform for iOS. And in the rules, I'm going to want to use device management type equals unmanaged. We can then use this filter to specifically target our app protection policies to unmanaged devices or devices that don't exist within Intune. I'll go ahead and create the filter and go up to app protection to assign it to my already created app protection policies. In the assignments, I'm going to hit edit, add a group. We're going to use our all users group here, and hit edit filter because we're going to want to use our newly created BYOD iOS devices filter. I'm going to include and select that filter. This means that any corporate managed iOS devices you have won't be impacted by this particular app protection policy. App protection policies also need to be applied to user groups ideally, because there is no device in this instance for it to actually action against. So we're using user groups with the filter. I'm going to go ahead and hit save on here. And that's our app protection policy done, right? Not quite. While the app protection policy is applied to a user, there's nothing actually telling the device that it needs to use that app protection policy. And we're going to have to hop over into Entra and Conditional Access to enforce that. Here in the Entra portal, we're going to want to go down to Protection and Conditional Access. Under Policies, we have the option to create a new policy from a template. Obviously, we haven't got any other conditional access policies in here at the minute, but the templates are pre-built templates for conditional access policies, which are really easy to use. And if we go into remote work, one of the ones just down here is require approved client apps or app protection policies. What we can do is select that one and review and create. We can have it in report only mode if we're just interested in seeing what the experience would be, or you could include a specific user group for testing. The controls here and the access controls are to require either an approved client app, so using Outlook, or that the app protection policy is being enforced on that application to then secure the data. Now we've created that conditional access policy, if I was to open up the Outlook app on my phone, log into my corporate account, I would then be prompted, based on the conditions that we'd set in the app protection policy, to do certain actions, such as set an additional PIN to secure the corporate data within those managed apps. Now, before we roll any devices into Intune, there's a couple of other prerequisites we're going to need to configure first. Let's start with iOS. Through the iOS menu, into Enrollment, at the top here is Apple MDM Push Certificate. What this certificate does is create a chain of trust between an enrolled device and your Intune tenant through Apple's services. There's a couple of steps here in the configuration, but the most important one is the creation of the actual certificate within the Apple certificate portal. Because this requires an Apple account, you're going to need to create one using a mailbox that exists within the tenant, or that you're going to have continued access to, and not a personal Apple ID. If you were to create another one with a different Apple ID, you're basically recreating that chain of trust, and any already enrolled devices will lose communications with Intune, which is probably not what you want to do. I'm not going to step through the configuration here, but if I was to go through, it involves downloading the CSR, uploading it into the Apple portal, and then uploading the certificate that we're given the other side into Intune to create that certificate. The certificate lasts for a year, so every year it will need to be renewed. Next up, let's configure the Android prerequisites. I'm going to head into Android, Enrollment, and Manage Google Play. This looks a lot like the iOS configuration, but a few less steps. What I'm going to do is hit I agree and press the Launch Google to Connect Now button. What that's going to do is pop up another tab and run us through the flow of creating an account within the Manage Google Play services. It's suggesting that we use the account that we're logged in as, though it doesn't matter if you use the same service or support account that you used in the iOS setup in this one, as you can go into the Google Admin Center and add additional administrators afterwards. Once we run through that flow, that will create the connection with Intune and allow us to enroll Android devices and deploy apps through the Managed Google Play Store. Finally, Windows. Let's head into Windows, Enrollment, and Automatic Enrollment. Now these are the defaults, but it's worth checking anyway. The top option here is MDM user scope, and that needs to be set to either some and targeted to a user group where the users are licensed with Intune and they're going to be the ones that are enrolling devices, or easier, all. If it's not set to one of these and it's set to none, as soon as a user tries to enroll a device, they're going to get a failure. Now, Windows enrollment can be done in a number of ways. The ideal option would be to use Windows Autopilot. But there are some additional complications that we're not going to go into in these videos around getting device hashes into your tenant from an OEM or utilizing the new Autopilot device prep. The main reason Autopilot was preferred is that it's the only way of making sure that a user that's enrolling a device into Entra doesn't get made a local administrator on that device. Luckily, there is another way we can tackle this issue. If we head over to Entra and into the Devices menu and Device Settings, here in the middle are Local Administrator Settings. The bottom one here is around registering. The registering user is added as a local administrator on the device during Entra join. If we head and set this to none, that means that the person enrolling that device is no longer going to be a local administrator on that device, which is exactly what we want to do. While we're in here, we're also going to turn on the Entra Local Administrator Password Solution, or LAPS option, and hit Save. Now that our enrollment prerequisites are configured, let's take a look at compliance. Device compliance in Intune can be seen as a set of conditions that we want to be true to mark that device compliant. As you can see in this example, we want a number of things to be required, such as the drive being encrypted with BitLocker, that the Windows firewall is turned on, and that Defender real-time protection is not only turned on, but up to date. It's important to note that compliance policies are cumulative and act as an and, not an or, so all of these things have to be true for that compliance policy to actually be marked as compliant. In the Actions for Non-Compliance section, you can do things such as email the user, or add a grace period, such as the one in the example, to allow the user to bring that device back into a compliant state if it's something that they can actually control. For more information, please visit the Microsoft Learn article. I'm going to go into Devices, Compliance, and firstly have a look at the compliance settings. There's two options here: mark devices with no compliance policy as, and how long compliance policies are valid for if devices don't check in for a while. The top one's really important, especially if you're going to be using device compliance state as part of a block or allow action in conditional access. It's important in that respect to set it to not compliant if you were going to do that, which I'll get onto in a minute. 30 days is generally a decent period of time for a compliance state to be valid for, so I'm going to leave that be. Next up, I'm going to head into Policies and go and create a Windows compliance policy. I'm going to give it a name. And we'll see a number of options here. Now, some of them are related to very specific things like Config Manager co-management, but I'm going to drop down the device health and the system security. These top three, BitLocker, Secure Boot, and Code Integrity, form a really solid framework for underlying system security. So I'm going to make sure that we require those. There's some options on passwords, but I'm comfortable with the password requirements within Entra itself. So I'm going to go down to device security. And I'm also going to make sure that the Windows firewall is active, that antivirus and anti-spyware are valid, and that device has a TPM, which it should do anyway. Because M365 Business Premium includes Defender for Business, we can also use these Defender options. So I'm going to require that the anti-malware is available, is up to date, and that real-time protection is turned on. Hitting Next brings us the actions for non-compliance. The default here is that the device gets marked as non-compliant immediately. This can cause issues when using it in conjunction with conditional access, because those top options, specifically BitLocker, rely on the Windows Health Attestation Service, which only checks at boot time. And during an enrollment, BitLocker is still going to be in the process of spinning up, so that device is not going to be compliant, giving a pretty bad user experience. What we can do is add some time here in the schedule. So I'm going to put 0.5, essentially giving us 12 hours to have that device ensure that it has applied BitLocker, encrypted the device, and the device has been rebooted before marking the device as non-compliant. Other options are available here, such as actually emailing the user or automatically adding it to a device retire list. I'm not going to go and configure those, but you could theoretically send an email to the end user first before marking the device as non-compliant. I'm happy with a 0.5 days after non-compliance, so I'm going to go ahead into assignments and I'm going to add all users in here rather than all devices. Reason being that we don't really want to evaluate local accounts on the device, and that can cause some strange issues with compliance state, which we don't want to actually block access to a user for any other reason than there's actually something wrong with the device. Hit next and create, and we have a live Windows compliance policy. The same can be done for the other platforms, ensuring similar sorts of base security levels are met with devices that are enrolled into Intune. Now that we've configured our compliance policy, we need to enforce that as part of a conditional access policy. So let's hop into Entra, go to conditional access, policies, and let's have a look and see if there's a template. Because we're going to be enrolling all of our devices as cloud native Entra join, this bottom require MDM enrolled and compliant device to access cloud apps for all users sounds like the one that I want to go and apply. Having a look at some of the options, I can see that it's going to apply to all users and require that our devices are marked as compliant. Now I've only just created the Windows compliance policy and not Android and iOS, so if I was to go ahead and turn this one on and try and enroll an iOS device, I'm not going to be able to access corporate resources or may even be blocked in enrolling. So I'm going to have that one in report only mode and go back to Intune and create other compliance policies that I need. We've configured our prerequisites, we've created a compliance policy, and following the Windows enrollment scenario, a user would now be able to enroll a device into Entra, do as Entra join, and join Intune. But we haven't actually configured anything else. So let's take a look at apps first. I'm going to go into Apps, Windows, and hit Add. Currently we've got nothing. There are a number of app types here, including Microsoft Store apps, and down at the bottom, Win32 apps, and there's a couple of other options like M365 apps in there. As users are going to need to use the Office suite, let's deploy M365 apps using the built-in installer. Keep those bits of information, and I want to be a little bit more specific with the configuration of Office here, so I'm going to choose the option to enter XML data and use an existing XML configuration with some additional app settings that I've already pre-configured, excluding things that I don't want, like Access or Publisher, as part of that install. Let's just validate that that's fine. Hit Next, and set that as a required install on all our enrolled devices. So now users are going to get the Office suite installed as part of their enrollment or soon following enrollment. Another thing that's going to be important is access to the company portal. So I'm going to head into this Microsoft Store app, search the store for company portal, I'm going to select that. I want it installed at the system level, and again a required install on all devices. So now users are going to get the company portal app and the Office suite installed. There are some other options here at the bottom. Line of business app is the older version of app deployments within Intune. I would recommend always using the Win32 app to deploy anything else that you need to, even if it's an EXE or an MSI. There's the Intune content prep tool that you can just run through the setup of and create a Win32 app out of that install to then upload into Intune and deploy to devices as you see fit. Another thing that we need to think about is updates. Let's start with Windows updates. I'm going to go to Devices, Windows, and Windows Updates. Now, there's a couple of options here at the top. I'm going to create an update ring. In this update ring settings, I want Microsoft products to be updated. I'm happy to allow drivers to automatically update. As far as the quality update or the monthly cumulative updates are concerned, I want to give it a couple of days after they're released, so I'm just going to choose 3. The automatic update behavior within Windows and the default behavior is incredibly good, so I'm going to choose Reset to Default to utilize the built-in native Windows behavior, which also does things like intelligent active hours. So rather than setting maintenance windows, Windows automatically kind of works out when users are using devices and tries to apply updates outside of that period of time. I don't want users to be able to pause updates, so I'm going to disable that. But I'm fine with them actually going in and hitting the check updates button. If there are no updates for the device, it's not going to get any. I'm happy using the Windows default notifications, but I want to enforce a deadline to make sure that devices are patched by a certain time. So I'm going to hit allow, and for quality updates, I'm going to choose 2, and grace period is after those updates have been applied, how long the user gets to reboot before a forced reboot. I'm going to give them another day. I'm happy to apply that same policy to all devices and hit create. So we've got a Windows update ring. The last thing I'm going to do after configuring the update ring is ensure I go into tenant administration, connectors and tokens, and Windows data. I'm going to turn on Windows data, which ensures that diagnostic and telemetry info gets sent up to Intune to ensure that Windows Update reports are correct as part of that telemetry process, and hit save. And that's it. We've configured all of our prerequisites. A user can now enroll a device as entry-join into Intune, get some Office apps, get the company portal, and start working. There's obviously plenty more that we can do. Create some additional applications. There's lots of configuration options either through the built-in baselines if I was to follow a CIS build kit, or there's some other community options available as well to ensure the security and compliance of that device just gets stronger. But for now, we're in a good place and users can start enrolling devices.